Hello everyone, it's Thursday. It's good to see all of you again, and I really hope you're ready for a different kind of video today. So during this whole quarantine situation, which here in Ohio has been relaxed a bit in recent weeks, I found myself with an ample amount of time, of which large quantities have been spent on teaching from home, but now that the summer months are here, I have more time for resting and recreating, as my uncle would say. That being said, and it's already no surprise to you because you saw the thumbnail and the title of the video below, but anyway, today I'm going to be discussing and sharing with you all some interesting religious parallels that I noticed in the latest Netflix original series, Stranger Things. Before I start, a few quick disclaimers. First, these are my own interpretations about what I have come to understand and believe about my faith. Nothing said further is meant to be taken more than pure interpretation on my part. So for those of you who like to comment on things not being entirely accurate, or that's not what I was taught, please understand that these are my own interpretations. I will respect your thoughts and opinions, but please also respect mine as well. Second, whether these parallels were done intentionally by the creators or not, I don't know. But in watching this series, it became very clear that there were some similarities that could be discussed. Lastly, for those of you who have not seen this show, I highly recommend it. Note that spoilers lie ahead, so if you don't want to know some pertinent information about the progression of this show, I would suggest leaving now. With all of that behind us, let's get started with the video. So before I get into the nitty-gritty of this discussion, let's get some context. Season 1 opens in November of 1983 in the fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana. It's here that we are introduced to the main protagonists of the show, or who we believe to be the main protagonists, and they are 4 middle school boys: Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will, who are all playing Dungeons & Dragons in Mike's basement. This is where we can see our first parallel. Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D as it's also called, not to be confused with D&D Home Furnishings, a furniture store based in Cherry Hill, New Jersey that went bankrupt in 2008, is a tabletop role-playing game where players create a character and then complete various quests set before them by the game leader, known as the Dungeon Master, or the DM. Also not to be confused with a drum major, the leader of a marching band. So anyway, the 4 boys, Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will, are all playing D&D as the show opens. Now, D&D is as much a role-playing game as it is a storytelling game. Essentially, the characters in each campaign are telling a story as they complete the quests set before them by the DM. What's important to note that in the show, there are 4 players. Well, where in Christianity do we see 4 people telling us a story? We need to look no further than the 4 evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, after realizing this, we could take it one step further and characterize each evangelist with their counterpart in Stranger Things. So let's start with an easy one. Mike, the Dungeon Master, the one who is telling the main story. This is extremely similar to the evangelist known as Mark. Mark's gospel was the first to be written, believed to have been completed around AD 70. His gospel is the shortest and the fastest moving of all of them, but what's also interesting to note is that Matthew and Luke all drew material for their gospels from Mark's gospel since it was written first. Luke begins writing his gospel the year Mark completes his, while Matthew doesn't begin his until 10 years later. So just as Matthew and Luke looked to Mark's gospel to begin writing their own accounts of the life and teachings of Jesus, Dustin, Lucas, and Will look to Mike, their DM, for instructions on playing their D&D campaign. The other easy parallel between the D&D campaign in Stranger Things and the evangelists can be seen in the character Will, the one who goes missing at the beginning of Season 1. Eventually he is found, but now has a completely new outlook on life after being trapped for a week in what's known as the Upside Down. The character Will can be likened to the evangelist John, the writer of the last gospel, and the one that is the most different from the others. John's gospel is more poetic and contains many stories not found in the other 3 gospels, such as the raising of Lazarus, the wedding at Cana, and the washing of the feet. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke are often known as the Synoptic Gospels, synoptic meaning same view. Now, while these Gospels are different, I mean they were written for different groups of people, the content put forth in each of them is relatively similar, much like the personalities of Mike, Dustin, and Lucas. Will, on the other hand, is a little different from them. His differences are even mentioned by his mother Joyce when she visits the police station to report him missing. It's the differences in Will's personality coupled with his experience in the Upside Down that make him a good parallel to the evangelist John. Now the next 2 were a little difficult and it took me some time to get this right, so hear me out. So we have Mike as Mark, we have Will as John, next we have Lucas as Luke. Now, this isn't because their names are similar, though that would make some sense why you would think that, but I do have one solid reason why I believe this. In Season 2, which takes place around Halloween in 1984, we're introduced to two new characters, Billy and his stepsister Max. They've just relocated to Hawkins from California. The boys, well, at least Dustin and Lucas, want to include Max in their party. And by the way, party is what you refer to the group of people you play D&D with. So if I refer to it from here on out, know that I'm talking about it in that context and not like something with balloons and cake and stuff like that. Anyway, so Dustin and Lucas want to include Max since she's new to the school and might not have many friends. Sounds like me in 8th grade. This desire is not welcomed by Mike since he's still healing from the events that happened at the end of Season 1. Anyway, at one point in Season 2, Lucas is able to fill Max in on everything that happened the year prior, telling her everything that happened regarding Will's disappearance and something else that I'll get to later. I liken this moment to how Luke begins his gospel. He says in chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, "Since many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as those who were eyewitnesses from the beginning and ministers of the word have handed them down to us, I too have decided, after investigating everything accurately anew, to write it down in an orderly sequence for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may realize the certainty of the teachings you have received." What Lucas in Stranger Things is doing here with Max is explaining to her in his own words the events of the previous year, therefore giving his own account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, to quote the first verse of Luke chapter 1. It's through this small encounter that I am led to believe that Lucas is a good parallel for the Gospel of Luke. Now, if that was a stretch, hear me out on this last one. Dustin as Matthew. How does this make sense? Well, what's Matthew's Gospel known for? Anyone know? My middle schoolers watching, you guys know? Leave it in comments. I'm going to tell you anyway, but you can still leave an answer in comments. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5 through 7, where we get everything from the Beatitudes to the Our Father. It's through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel that Jesus teaches us how to be saved. He gives us the directions on assuring our salvation by clarifying the teachings of the Old Testament and explaining why things were the way they were. We hear everything from loving our enemies to being salt to the earth to doing to others what we would want done to us. Now, how does Dustin fit into all this? Well, in Season 3, which takes place around the 4th of July in 1985, Dustin returns home from a month-long summer science camp where he was able to construct a radio tower that will allow him to contact his new girlfriend who lives in Salt Lake City. In order for the radio tower to work, it must be set up at the highest possible point in town, which is called Weathertop. It's basically just a hill that looks over the whole town. Now, initially, Dustin doesn't get through to his girlfriend, but this radio tower plays a key role in the finale of Season 3 when Dustin returns to it to help Joyce, Will's mom, Hopper, the town's police chief, and Murray, a private investigator, conspiracy theorist, I don't know, some guy like that, access an underground Russian base where they are trying to access the Upside Down. Since earlier in Season 3, Dustin and some other characters found their way into this base, they know where everything is and know how to access the machine that's boring the hole into the Upside Down. Now here's the parallel. Dustin is helping Joyce, Hopper, and Murray stop the Russians from opening the gate to the Upside Down. In order to do that, he needs to be at this radio tower on top of the hill. What is he doing there? Giving them instructions, showing them the way. This sounds familiar, doesn't it? Just as Dustin uses his radio tower atop Weathertop to help those three get to the center of the underground Russian base and stop them from opening the gate to the Upside Down, Matthew's Gospel uses the Sermon on the Mount to help us understand the new teachings of Jesus and guide us in becoming more like him. Now, this was just the first part. I have a whole other section coming up here, so get ready. So far, I've mentioned pretty much all the major characters that you can see in this show, with the exception of a few. Now, there's one significant character who I have not mentioned yet because, well, this next section focuses completely on them. Some of you may already know that I am referring to the character of Eleven, or Elle as they call her in the show. So let's back up a bit. We're first introduced to Eleven when she sneaks into a diner while wearing a hospital gown. It's also hard to tell that she's a girl because her head is shaved. We're not entirely sure where she came from until we're introduced to the character of Dr. Brenner, the lead scientist at the Hawkins lab and the overseer of the experiments that are performed there. It turns out 11 has escaped from the lab after an incident, which I'll get into later. What's interesting to note about 11 is that she has these telepathic and psychokinetic powers. She basically can control matter in whatever way she pleases, almost like the character Jonas from the YouTube series The Platoon of Power Squadron. We see her do this for the first time at the diner when she's able to turn off a fan by just glaring at it with this glare that she has. Now we know something is up with her when a woman from Child Protective Services shows up to the diner after the owner calls to inform them that she's there. What looks like a routine visit by this agent turns into a murder scene, and the diner is overrun with people from the lab. Now 11, realizing what's happening, is able to flee from the diner and get away from the bad people, as she so calls them. Now don't forget about the boys, they're still in this as well. While out searching for Will one dark and stormy night, they find not Will, but 11 hiding in the woods near where Will went missing. So that's basically how 11 comes to join the party. Now, where are the parallels? First, let's look at her abilities. She can control matter. She can move things with her mind. She's basically a superhero. Her powers also allow her to look into the Upside Down from the normal world. Now remember, the Upside Down is where Will has been taken at the beginning of Season 1, but no one knows that at that time. I'll talk more about the Upside Down later, and I realize I've been talking a lot about that without giving you context, but it needs to be mentioned here when talking about 11, and I swear it will all make sense later. Now, later on in Season 2, we learn a little bit more about 11's past. Her mother, Terry Ives, was apparently working with Dr. Brenner as he began these experiments on young people with abnormal abilities. Some things went haywire, and, well, let's just say 11's mother has been left in a catatonic state. She can't really communicate with anyone. In the show, we also really never hear anything about 11's father. All we know about 11 is that she has these abilities, and apparently her mother might have as well, maybe? Now, I'm pretty sure you can all take a really good guess at what I'm going to say next. Okay, here we go. Who, in the history of Christianity, had special abilities? I wonder who it could be. Now, yes, okay, I get it. 11 is Jesus Christ. Now, I realize that just because 11 has these special powers automatically makes her the Christ figure in this series. Taking that fact and just putting it over here for a moment, there are some other clear parallels between 11 and Jesus Christ beyond the superpowers. Okay, first, we're only aware of 11's mother, Terry Ives. Jesus initially also only has a physical mother, our Blessed Mother Mary. Joseph was not Jesus' biological father. We can relate this at the end of Season 2 when Hopper the police chief adopts 11 as his own daughter. Second, once the party becomes aware of 11's powers, she is adamant that she is able to defeat the evil that is coming from the Upside Down. See, I told you we'd get back to it. We learn in Season 1 that Will was taken to the Upside Down by a creature known as a Demogorgon, which can roughly be described as a demon. Elle's powers are key in helping the party both rescue Will and destroy the Demogorgon. Now, if this does not sound like salvation history, I don't know what else would. Jesus' mission, which was to make present the reign of God, is done so by defeating the powers of evil. This is the whole reason for the crucifixion. The love of God poured out for us and for our salvation. Jesus sacrifices himself on the cross so that we, the sinners that we are, do not have to endure that kind of death. This is clearly seen at the end of Season 1 when 11 destroys the Demogorgon in the classroom, saving Mike, Dustin, and Lucas. She disappears with it, and initially we don't know where she is. She sacrifices herself for her friends, or followers. Didn't Jesus have friends and followers too? So that they are saved from a gruesome death by a Demogorgon. This is the reason Mike is so depressed at the beginning of Season 2. Yes, he may be interested in Elle, but at the same time, she gave her life, or so it seemed, that Mike and his friends would be safe. Now, at the end of Season 2, we have what I would call the resurrection moment. So in Christianity, we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus on Easter, when Jesus shows his disciples that he has conquered death by being raised from the dead. In the penultimate episode of Season 2, we have this fantastic moment when Elle is reunited with the party, showing herself to be alive, but also to once again defend and protect her friends. Her reveal in that episode is just so awesome. Now, what I also find interesting is where Elle came from prior to that moment. There's a standalone episode in season 2 where Elle travels to Chicago to visit her sister, someone else who was also a test subject in the Hawkins lab. It's through this meeting that Elle is able to channel the powers that she has and make herself stronger with the help of her sister. I liken this totally to Jesus' wandering in the desert when he's tempted by the devil. Jesus goes out into the desert to prepare for his mission. It's through the temptations by the devil that allow Jesus to grow stronger in fulfilling the Father's will for him, just as Elle channels her powers to complete her mission. And what exactly is her mission? This is where the final parallel, and the last one that I'll talk about today, comes into play. To start this section, let's go back to the Upside Down. So we learn in season 1 that Elle can look into the Upside Down from the normal world. She just needs concentration and a blindfold, and for it to be cold or something like that. Anyway, the parallel between these two worlds is shown as a void, as in total blackness, my nickname in high school. I think of it almost as like a purgatory-like state, because it's not the normal world, but it's not the Upside Down. I don't know. If you have thoughts about that, leave them in comments below. So anyway, right before Elle escapes the lab, she's placed into this sensory deprivation tank that would allow her to better concentrate on accessing the void. It's in this moment when she first notices the Demogorgon. After approaching the creature and touching it, it turns around and roars in her face. We're then taken back to the normal world, where this portal known as a gate opens up, releasing the Demogorgon into the normal world. And it's through the chaos of all this that Elle is able to escape the lab. With the Demogorgon on the loose in the normal world, Elle not only needs to destroy it, which she does at the end of season 1, but also close the gate to the Upside Down. Now, when season 2 starts, we're introduced to another new character from the Upside Down, known as the Mind Flayer. This Mind Flayer first takes control of Will, the one who was lost in the Upside Down in season 1. He uses him to spy on the members of the party and the people at the lab in order to gain access and control to the normal world through another new creature, a spoof on the Demogorgon known as Demodogs. Elle's mission is clearly to close the gate, which, no surprise, she does at the end of season 2. Now, parallels, okay? First, I hope we can all agree that the Upside Down can be likened to hell. It's not a very pretty place. It's very unsettling whenever the characters go there, and whenever someone does end up there, they're almost always tortured in some way. It's a pretty bad place to be. Next, the Mind Flayer, the ruler of the Upside Down. Well, if the Upside Down is hell, then who would the Mind Flayer be? Yes, exactly, the devil, Satan. The opponent, Prince of Darkness, as we call him. We then have the Demodogs, the servants or the slaves to the Mind Flayer, the ones that do what it wants. If we compare that, we can see that they are just like the demons, Satan's followers, the other fallen angels. I don't think it's a coincidence that a Demogorgon or a Demodog, which I said earlier could be thought of as a demon, would be called that if it wasn't done intentionally. Now, if Elle's mission was to close the gate of the Upside Down, what does that do? Well, we learn in season 2 that the closing of the gate cuts off the life to the Mind Flayer and the Demodogs. They cannot live when the gate is closed. When Elle does close the gate, we see all the Demodogs fall to the ground dead and the Mind Flayer vacate Will's body after some intense exorcising by his mother, his brother Jonathan, and Mike's sister Nancy. By learning to channel her powers from her trip to Chicago, Elle is able to save everyone from the Mind Flayer. Similarly, Jesus defeats death by being raised from the dead, and showing Satan that death has no power over him and that the gates of hell will never prevail. Both Elle's and Jesus' missions are essentially one and the same: save humanity from death. Elle does this by closing the gate to the Upside Down. Jesus does this by being raised from the dead. Now, there's a couple smaller parallels that you can make, two of which I'll mention here. The first one goes back to the Mind Flayer. There's a theory that the Mind Flayer is patient 1, the first test subject Dr. Brenner worked with at the Hawkins lab. Somehow, either this person created the Upside Down or found their way into it at some point and has been there ever since. If we take that first part, the idea that the Upside Down was created for the Mind Flayer, this further confirms the parallels between the Upside Down and hell. We know that Satan was a fallen angel, Lucifer. He was kicked out of heaven for attempting to be like God. I'll keep it simple for now. Well, when there's no place for him or his followers to go, you need to create one, and this is where hell comes into play. God never intended for there to be a hell. His whole plan was for all of us to live with him fully in heaven. Because of the actions of Lucifer, we now have this place called hell. If we relate that back to the Stranger Things universe, if Patient 1 and Dr. Brenner didn't see eye to eye on something and Patient 1 lashed out, Dr. Brenner may have very well kicked him out and forced him to create his own home. Ergo, the Upside Down. The second smaller parallel is one that I intentionally left for last. I feel that it's a parallel that can be applied to a lot of things in our own lives, not just the similarities between Christianity and Stranger Things. It's clear that El becomes more powerful as the show progresses. In Season 3, some characters, Mike especially, become wary of using El's powers too much and express that to other members of the party. While they argue about it excessively at times, El remains calm and tells not only Mike, but the other members as well, to trust her. Isn't that what Jesus expects of us? To trust him? To trust that he is going to be with us and save us and guide us along the path that we need to be? And yet, for so many of us, myself included, trusting in Jesus is just so difficult. We want to be in control. We want to do things ourselves. We don't need someone else's help. In both cases, the scenario presented in Stranger Things and in our own lives, it's clear that we cannot do these kinds of things alone. Saint Therese of Lisieux, a French saint who lived in the latter part of the 19th century, writes the following regarding trust in God, delivered here by Father Dave Nuss.
Therese writes that what hurts God the most, our most serious faults and failings, our lack of trust in God.
Trust. It's the key to our salvation and the salvation of those in Hawkins. It's essential in our success and the success in the party's closing of the gate. And with that, I leave you, and I thank you all for watching if you made it this far. I hope to do more videos like this in the future. Over here you can find a more recent video. There's the subscribe button down there, somewhere over here and all that jazz. I've gained a few new subscribers over the last few months, so if you're new here, welcome, glad you're here, thanks for joining me. Again, leave any comments below if you thought I was going to mention something, but I didn't. I know there are some other parallels that could have been made, but these specifically were the ones that spoke to me. So thank you all again for watching. God bless, and I'll see you next time.